Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.
All right, welcome back from this short break. Now I have with me Christopher Miller. He is a developer at Jump24. He's based in the UK. That's where his charming accent comes from. I see here in my notes, he remembers getting his first introduction to computing in 1985 when he built a computer together with his dad. Welcome to the stage, Christopher. How are you doing?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I'm good. Yourself?
Yes, I'm perfect. Thank you for asking. All right, so you developer at Jump24. Can you tell us a little bit what is Jump24 and what you do there?
Yeah, so Jump24 is a Laravel partner, and we specialize in Laravel application development. Test-driven development is one of our biggest things, as is standards, as you'll see from the rest of the talk. We work across the board from little apps to full-blown enterprise-level applications, all working in PHP and varying other frameworks, but the main work is Laravel and using Tailwind for the front end.
All right. And for all the time you have been working as a developer or being in contact with computing, you learn some things about why standards are important, and that is exactly what you're going to talk with us about. And yeah, I will share your screen and the stage is yours. Christopher, take it away.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. So yeah, our standards and why we use them. Who am I? What am I doing here? As I've just said, developer at Jump24, work with Laravel and Cake PHP using test-driven development. Contact details are there, and the obligatory, we're recruiting remote positions, but you must be UK resident. So why do we need standards? We have a lot of systems we use, and I do mean a lot. We use Docker, Terraform, AWS, PHP, Nginx, Laravel, Inertia, React, Sass, MySQL, Redis, HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and Webpack. So on a day-to-day basis, we can be using all of these and more. So the key takeaway for this talk, standards help. They enable developers to work together better. It simplifies code review and keeps consistency across projects. So today I'm going to talk about the PHP standards we apply. This is just a part of the overall framework of standards, but anything that I say about PHP applies to any language. So PHP standards are our centerpiece. We use Linter, ECS, or Easy Coding Standard, PHP Stan, Enlighten, and Tests. Everything we do is thought of in terms of the hit by a bus scenario. If a developer was not available tomorrow, could someone else pick up their work? And as you can see from that meme, we've all been there where we can write something on Friday, think we'll finish it Monday, and then have no idea what we've just written. So what's Linter? This is not just about making it pretty. So Linter is used to correct code errors that are basic errors such as missing semicolons, missing variable declarations. So here we've got a really simple piece of code, just a constant, a function, and it looks okay at first glance. But actually there's a few errors. So with Linter, we can run the code, we can see that it fails and tells us that there's a few errors there. But actually, there's a better way of seeing this. So in PHP, we'd bring in a couple of packages in Composer. We'd bring in PHP Console Highlighter and PHP Parallel Lint, and we'd set ourselves up a little script in the Composer file that just runs the linter. So if we run the lint, you can see that it's found syntax errors in a single file, and it lays it out much nicer. And as developers, we know that red means something's wrong. So we can see that there's an error here. It tells us exactly what the error is, where the error is, in a nice clean way. So if we go back to our really simple example, we can fix that just by adding a semicolon to the end of the constant, a semicolon to the end of the echo, and then actually run the function. So now if we go back and re-execute that code, we can see that we run linter fixed, and it executes and outputs something else, which is exactly what we'd expect. So, standards packages. We start to enforce our particular coding style using our standards packages. They are publicly available on Packagist, and we have two of them. We have the PHP coding standards, we have the Laravel coding standards, and we have the project analyzers, all available from the Jump 24 root on Packagist. So we bring in the packages, we add some extra scripts. So we'll add in ECS, we'll add in static. So ECS is just an ECS check run. Static will run PHP stan analyzer. Analyze will run Enlighten, which we'll come back to in a minute, and then test would run our tests. So then we'd add a PHP stan neon file. So this in PHP is used for static analysis, and this will define what our standards are for static analysis. And this will look at code and identify potential improvements to the code that we're running. We have the standards set to run at 8, which is the highest level, and we exclude the vendor path because we can't actually fix somebody else's code without doing PRs into their systems. Don't forget to add a blank PHP stan baseline neon file if you're setting this up on a PHP project. So ECS will set up the ECS configuration file. Again, it's a relatively simple file. You just pull in the configurator from the packages. The readmes tell you exactly how to do this, and then you can set some paths to run this over. In our case, we'll run it across app and tests. So then we just publish the Enlighten config. I use Sail here, but Artisan will do the job just as well. Then we configure Enlighten. So in the config Enlighten, we just add the Jump 24 analyzers to the base path and to the analyzer paths, and then we're all set to go for Enlighten. So what are we using here? We're using linting, static analysis, coding standards, so PSR 12, security, consistency, and efficiency checks. Why linting? As I said earlier, it actually highlights code errors for us where it's errors such as missing semicolons. So mainly we're looking for basic typing errors here. Why ECS? It allows us to ensure our standards for code are met. Extending this easily allows for in-editor highlighting of our custom standards. What standards do we apply there? PSR 12 and related other standards. Some external standards such as Squiz Labs, as well as some of our own within the package. Why do we use PHP stan? For us, we feel that it integrates better with Laravel. It allows for static analysis and helps us to strengthen our code. Why Enlighten? This is a relatively new package. It analyzes Laravel for security, consistency, performance, and maintainability, and is easily extendable, which we have done with a couple of our own sniffers within this. So this is only a part of our standards. We have standards that we apply to every single part of our stack. Over time, these standards have evolved not just to cover how we code, but how we estimate things, how we present things to clients, how we manage projects, and almost every other part of the business. So let's take a look at these standards in action. We'll start by just looking at a simple little application that I've written. It's a basic blog post system, so you can add posts, you can view posts, but you can see here that we've got a couple of errors here. So the code will run, but there are errors. So let's go and take a look at the actual code and see these standards in process. If I head over to PHP Storm, I'm here inside the standards talk application. All I've got open at the moment is the composer JSON, where you can see that we have the commands in place that I spoke about earlier. So let's take a look at the first one we mentioned, which was parallel lint or PHP lint. So if I run composer lint, we can see that this will take a couple of seconds to pick up. And as it does pick up, it'll start running through the files and analyzing for linting faults. What we're hoping here is for the whole lot just to be dots, run all the way through, perfectly happy. So 97 files were checked in 5 seconds and there was nothing found. So we know that our linting standards are okay here. So we know that it's not a basic lint error. Let's run the next one. So if we run composer check, this will run easy coding standard. So if we run this, it takes a few seconds to run through. And again, this will analyze, and we can see here that it found 2 errors that need to be fixed manually and 2 that are fixable by the system itself. So we can just add a fix to the command. So let's take a look at what these errors are first. So if we scroll back, we can begin to see details of the actual errors that have been found. And if we scroll back to here, so the first one is in comment controller. We can see here that it's suggesting a change from having brackets within the having spaces within the brackets to not having spaces within the brackets. This one's given us a diff, so it's suggesting that this one can be fixed. Post controller, it's suggesting here again a similar sort of thing. We've got comma and no space. So these are relatively low level checks that are looking for just styling standards within our code. In this, it's suggesting that we add a space after the commas for the function parameters. We can see here it's also suggesting the same for the union return types. And again here. And again here. It's then suggesting some styling changes here. So let's see what we've got here. It looks like this is suggesting that we have a space between slug and slug. And it looks like we're suggesting the same thing for post and post. And that's applied 3 separate and different checkers there. We've also got user model. So we've got a public method is not camel caps format. So this is another of the PSR 12 standards. Can underscore post would not fit with our common standards within Jump 24. We'd expect that to be can post with a capital P and no underscore. So that one, it's not saying it can auto fix because there will be other places where that's called. And again with is admin. So let's see what happens if we fix the files first. So if we do vendor bin ECS check with fix. If we run the fix, it'll go through, and now it tells us that there are just the 2 errors left. And that's these 2 errors that are in the user file. And it tells us that it's fixed the others. So if we just do composer check again, we can make sure that it's not seeing anything else, which it isn't. So let's go and take a quick look at that user controller, or user model. And you can see here that can post and is admin are incorrectly cased. So we just correct that. And we do the same with that. Now that you think might be the end, but actually we want to make sure that we search for is admin. So there's a few occasions where that's present. So if we replace that with is admin, we can then replace these globally like that. And we can do the same with the other function, which was can post. So again, we apply these across the board, replacing places that we're using them. And there we go, we can see that that has now been replaced. So if I run check once more, we should have a clean result. And as you can see, no errors found. Great job, your code is shiny in style, and we like the color green. So that tells us that we've fixed ECS errors. At this point, we then move on to looking at static analysis. So this is where the checks start actually analyzing our code and telling us that things can be improved. So if I run compose as static, again, takes a couple of seconds to pick up, runs through the files, analyzing the files, and then tells us what errors it's got. And we can see it's analyzing 31 files here. So here we've got several errors. Let's look at the first one. So comment controller. Implicit array creation is not allowed. Variable input does not exist. If we go to comment controller, it tells us which line this is on. So we can see that it's on line 13. And here we have input from user is set as request user ID. All we need to do to resolve this, which makes our job easier to understand, is we create our empty array. Normally, we would also space out things here to make it just that little bit easier to read. So as you can see here, we've made a simple change that adds in the array, and then we're assigning things to the array. If you imagine this was a much more complicated function, it makes it easier to see what input is from the start and to keep that as consistent throughout. So the next one, post controller. So we can see here that it has a dynamic call to static method order by, call to undefined method with posts, show has parameter slug with no type hint, call to undefined method, parameter slug with no type hint, and parameter ID with no type hint. So let's go and have a look at this controller. If we open up post controller, we can immediately see the first one it's talking about, which is slug here. So I know that slug is a string, but if we look here, we can see that it's looking at post where slug is slug. We could go and check on the post model, and we can see in here that the attributes haven't yet been set for this. So we could set the attributes at the top of this for the model, which would give us an easy access to knowing that slug is a string. But in this instance, all we need to do is add in string, and that will resolve one of those errors. So on line 16, it's telling us we have a problem with a dynamic call to a static method. So let's go and take a look at this. So here we've got a bit of a complication with the way this is laid out. We can't quite read everything that's there. So normally we just lay this out a little bit better to help ourselves when we're looking at the code. And you can see here that that's much easier to understand. And again, we could do the same down here. So we've immediately got a small function that's much more readable. So order by is a static function. This is an occasion where PHP Stan has actually got this wrong. So order by can be called both statically and dynamically. So we'll revisit that in a moment, but there's a way of actually telling PHP Stan, I don't want you to worry about that error. Call to undefined method on line 18 with posts. So this again is where PHP Stan hasn't picked up on an element that we have that is magically created within Laravel. So with posts allows us to return a variable to the view called posts just by passing in the variable of posts that we've created from the query. So again, PHP Stan has that one wrong. So we resolved the show for string. And if we scroll down a little further, we can see that edit needs the type here. And we can see that this needs a type here. So an ID in our instance is always an integer. So that's just created some stronger checks on the post controller, but we've still got those ones that won't resolve automatically. So let's just quickly go through and resolve the remaining ones. Let's go and have a look at comment. So post has no return type. So if we look at this, it returns this belongs to. We check what belongs to returns, and it tells us that it returns belongs to exactly the same as above. By doing that, we now know when we look at this that we are expecting a belongs to response at any time from the comment when we're calling the post function. And then back to our user model, which we've looked at a couple of times. If we go back here, we can see that can post and isAdmin have no return types. So here we're returning booleans because we're checking if role is author or admin here. So we can return boolean here. And isAdmin is returning am I admin. So again, that's boolean. So a true or false result. So by resolving those, we can then go back and check what we have left. So if we rerun compose as static, we should now have 3 or 4 errors remaining. And it takes a couple of seconds to pick up and run through. Just like that, it tells us that there are 3 errors remaining. So those errors, we know that this is a case where PHP Stan has it wrong. So we can run the same command just with generate baseline. If I run the generate baseline, again, it will run through and analyze. And as it analyzes, it tells us that the baseline was created with 3 errors. If we go and take a look at the baseline, it actually tells PHP Stan to look out for this in post controller twice. And if you get that, ignore it. And look out for this in post controller once. And if you get that, ignore it. So now, if we rerun the static, we should get that there are no errors. And that will be exactly what we get as it picks up the files. No errors. So we can see here that PHP Stan is helpful for analyzing our code and telling us what might be going wrong in our code to help us to maintain consistency throughout code. So if you imagine somebody new coming onto a project that doesn't really know what's going on with the project, they can use the static analysis that we've had in place where we've fixed the problems that we see to enable them to have a better job of understanding the processes, understanding what's going into functions, what's coming out. And it will also help us to look for things that we might have missed in error management. So the final one is enlighten. So if we run composer analyze, this function will run enlighten for us, and this will go through analyzing the project and telling us several things that it might see that have problems. So in this particular setup, we have 48 different analyses, and this one takes the longest to run, but it does also give us some pretty clear results of what might be going wrong. And at the end of this, it gives us a nicely laid out table that details every error that we have. So we're up to 45, and we've already seen a few red fails. So we can see here that we've had 6 total failures. So let's scroll backwards and take a look. So the first one, your application does not rely on back-end dependencies with known security issues. So here we can see that League Fly System has a race condition that enables remote code execution. So in this case, Enlighten, it being Laravel specific, will look through Composer and tell us if there is anything that is directly noted as a vulnerable dependency. So this one is easy enough to resolve. And we run Composer update. We run composer update on the fly system, allow that to draw down the latest version. As you can see, it'll upgrade for us, regenerate the files, and the next time we run Enlighten, we should get no errors on that particular package. Whilst that carries on generating the optimized code, let's look a bit further back. So your application uses stable versions of dependencies. This is similar to the known security issues. However, this one will tell you if there are updates available for new stable versions of packages within Composer, and this will probably be pointing out to us that Fly System has a new stable version as well. Scrolling back a bit further, we can see that there's several here that have passed. So your application is not exposed to mass assignment vulnerabilities. This will look for occasions where you can just mass assign to the database. Application includes middleware to protect against CSRF attacks. These are all the security checks that Enlighten will run. Going back a little further, we can see that there's several checks here that are passing. So MVMRC will consistently use a standardized NVM version for projects that use Node for the front end. By using an MVMRC file, we can consistently ensure that everybody is using the same version, avoiding version conflicts. We can see that you don't access class properties invalidly. Application doesn't use invalid offsets. So there's a heck of a lot of tests for this section on consistency. So here we have cache prefixes set to avoid collisions with other apps. This particular one is primarily used to help with identifying individual caches for a project on a server where there are multiple applications running. So you may have a Redis instance that's shared between 3 or 4 different applications. So we'll make sure that we add a cache prefix, and you can set that. It even tells you where to set it in config cache line 108. So again, we're going to assume for a moment that we don't actually want to do that. And there's a way of ensuring that Enlighten doesn't do that. Doesn't allow that test to fail. So this is a micro improvement that it suggests. Your application doesn't contain unused middleware. So in this instance, there's a trust proxies middleware that's not being used in the global middleware. And it gives you links to the documentation for Enlighten that tells you everything you'd need to know about that problem. Again, a proper queue driver. So at the moment it's set to run in sync, which basically means that whenever it gets a request to run a job, it'll run it there and then, rather than passing it off to be queued and ran at a later point. So again, it tells us where to fix that on queue line 16. And then one of our own is whether all controllers are invocable single action controllers. So if I go back to the post controller, the post controller has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different functions here. So although we have 7 functions all related to post items on this little blog, what we would want to do is have 7 separate controllers. And rather than having a function called index, we'd have a single function like that is invoke, and we change the roots to use the invoke. So although you end up with more files, it becomes easier to pick up on things that you may need to change and where those things are. So you'd have, like for example, you would have a post index controller, you'd have a post create controller, a post store controller. The idea here that although you end up with more files, you know exactly which file is going to contain the code that you need, and you'd have the minimal amount of code at controller level, with everything being passed further back into things such as services, repositories. So actually in this example, we're breaking one of our standards, which is the repository pattern, by directly accessing the post query here. What we'd normally do is we'd have a post repository and we'd have a get all paginated function, for example. So that's a brief overview of our standards. The only thing remaining would be to look at how we can actually apply a baseline to Enlighten. So let's have a look at the Enlighten. And if we run Enlighten help, it'll tell us several different things that we can do. So in this instance, there isn't actually a baseline generator as such. What we can do, however, is inside our Enlighten configuration. So if we go to config and Enlighten, in here, we can start to add things to a skipped set of errors. So here, it's actually suggesting we can run the baseline. By going to the config file, we can see there's a helpful comment that tells us how to run the baseline. So if we run the artisan baseline, that should then change the errors by scanning through and adding these to the ignored errors as it finds them and stores them. So if we allow this to run back through again, as we can see, it takes a lot longer when you're not running it in CI mode because it's actually running further details. But if we look to our Enlighten, we can see that it's made some changes to the don't report section, and you can see there's several here. So if we quickly take a look at what it's actually added, we can see that it's added the invocable controllers class to don't report. It's added QDriver and analyzer. So basically all of the ones that we haven't yet resolved. So now what we do is we go back to our composer and we'd run one more check of analyzer. So we run composer analyze, which will run through our setup. And although it still tells us that the errors are there, what should happen is that it would allow this to pass through. And it'll report the errors, but it won't actually exit as a 0 from the command line, meaning that we can then go back at a future point, resolving errors that we may not have time to do or that aren't resolvable at this point in time. And we can see this is running through. We're currently at 45 out of 48. One more check. So there you go. You can see that it's telling us that 5 failed. So the one that we fixed worked, but it hasn't errored out, giving us a return code that would fail the checks. So just going back to that final slide again, if I go back to pitch, as I said, we have standards that apply to every single part of our stack. Over time, these standards have evolved not just to cover how we code, but how we estimate, how we present to clients, how we manage our projects, and almost every other part of our business. So, Mark, are you around and we can take a look for some questions?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Christopher, for your talk. This has been quite an insight into PHP development. May I ask your company or the team you're working with, how many people are working on those projects?
So at the moment, we have 11 staff, 2 of which are non-developers. So 9 developers working across multiple projects.
Oh, yeah.
It's more about the consistency between projects as such. So I could go and pick up on any project, and if that project has been implemented with our standards, I'd be able to follow the code through. I'd be able to pick it up fairly quickly.
All right. And if there's a change in a rule, For example, you add something. Is it difficult to maintain that throughout all the projects, or is that one central place where you change it and it updates everywhere?
So we have the standards packages in a centralized repo,
Okay.
available through Packagist and available through Composer install.
All right.
So it's tagged versions, so we know which version we're using, and because we've got Enlighten, it'll actually tell us that it's the standards packages are also out of date.
All right, and there are still no questions from the audience. So quickly to the audience, if you have questions for Christopher, please make sure to send them to the questions tab. But I have some more questions myself. For example, do you think that having too many rules can become can make the team slower, especially if the team doesn't have that many members, or do you think it would make it even faster? Like, is it a block in productivity or not?
So, one of the things that we do is when we take on new staff, every staff member will go through the pull request process. So pull requests will be done for every staff member. Originally, we didn't have in place any of the standards packages, anything that would automatically help for this. So what we found was that 90% of our time on pull requests was you're missing a space here, you've not got a semicolon there, you haven't got this returning false first. So we'll use fast fail as a principle. So if it's going to fail, it should fail first before you've done the success code, that kind of thing. The other side of that as well is that although it's initially slower for a developer to pick up on the standards, with these packages in place, it does help developers to be producing cleaner code. And for us, that's one of the biggest goals. Cleaner code is one of the most useful things for us. Recently, we applied these standards to one application, and just by applying the standards and making changes that the standards packages suggested, we actually saw a 25 to 30% increase in efficiency. Well, and that was just by applying standards. There was no logic changes or anything.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I wanted to ask, can you tell us about one anecdote maybe where not applying standards was resulting in some sort of issue, where something went wrong because of not having those standards?
Absolutely. So there's a project that I work on that has a server. The main aim of that server is to send and receive documents. So it'll send documents out to customers and receive documents from customers. Before the standards were applied to that one, we had an incident where that server was down for 2 or 3 hours with a problem. In the end, it turned out that the problem was that we'd actually missed an exception that should have been handled. And so in the background, it was creating a 500 error, and the server was sort of failing at that point. But if those standards had been there, it would have told us through many of the standards that there was an unhandled exception.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, okay. So some downtime from the server. Okay, that's never good. All right. I got a message from Vince that he heard from Vessi that you have projects with underrepresented groups. Is that correct?
So yeah, this isn't actually a Jump 24 project, but we do support it in our local area. It's a project called School of Code. So the idea of School of Code is that they train people to be full stack developers in an intensive boot camp, 100% free to people that attend.
Nice.
It's funded by recruitment fees from employers that take them on, and partly funded by the local government. So West Midlands Combined Authority part fund it. It's in the process of doing the 6th cohort. I was actually on cohort 1.
Nice.
So when I first started in development, as you mentioned, 1985, that was that was building a computer for the first time and enjoying the idea of things moving around on screen. Had my own company for a while. Ill health took me out of the industry. Started applying to get back into the industry and discovered that my skills were so far out of date that the languages I was using didn't even exist anymore. That was the level of out of date I'd got. So I saw this advert come up on Facebook for School of Code and applied thinking, well, what's the worst that can happen? I'll lose a couple of hours and discover that it's not what it says it is. It definitely was. Went from that into the first employment with another company. 9 months later, moved on to Jump 24 and haven't looked back since.
Can you share the URL where we can know more about the project?
Yeah, 2 seconds. Let me just check what it is. It's schoolofcode.co.uk.
Okay. Let me show this like this.
Yep, that's the one.
All right. So everyone who is interested in knowing more about that project, schoolofcode.co.uk, there you will find more information. All right. Yeah. Are there any more questions for the audience? So far not. Let's just wait a few more seconds. If not, we can wrap up the session. Unless there's something else you want to talk about, we have a few minutes. We can just chat for a couple of minutes. For example, how did you transition? How did you transition for COVID? Go through with working from home and everything?
So for us, we initially started, when I joined the company, we were office based. I was working from the office in Birmingham 5 days a week, doing on average 1.5 to 2 hour commute each way. COVID arrived and we went fully remote basically overnight. We had a trial run, and then by the next week we decided that we were going fully remote. We haven't gone back to the office yet, and the general opinion of the company is that we just don't want to. It's helping us to remain remote. We do still own the office, we do still have access to the office, but most of us want to remain remote. We've found that for many of us it's helped. With using Slack as a main contact point, it proved to be much easier. We were used to using Slack anyway.
Wow, that's very nice that the company has that point of view to like have staying remote as an option. I know there are many companies that want to go back to the office as fast as possible for different reasons, probably. But yeah. All right. So yeah, we are running now out of time. We are reaching our goal soon. But thank you very much, Christopher, for all your for your talk and the answers to our questions. And I wish you a nice rest of the conference, which is over in a few hours. But there are some more talks to go through. I wish you enjoy them very much. Thank you again, Christopher.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have you found your dream job as a developer? Or are you stuck in an unfulfilling job? On WeAreDevelopers.com, you find over 1,000 jobs in Europe that fit the tech stack that you want to work with, and salaries go up to $130K. All you have to do is create a free profile, and you automatically get matched with jobs that fit your requirements. So what are you waiting for? Create your free profile and let companies apply to you now.